The ship was dying around her, every metal panel shaking, every light flickering like the last heartbeat of a fading star. The alien girl lay on the cold floor, her body weak, her vision blurry. She could feel the air getting thinner, the oxygen warning sirens screaming in the background. Her breathing came slow and painful, each inhale burning her chest. The control panel above her sparked wildly, showering her with tiny bursts of light. Somewhere far away she could hear the groan of twisted metal as the hull began to crack. Under the pressure of space, she tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy, as if the cold had already claimed them. Her fingers brushed against the emergency mask lying just out of reach, but her strength failed. She closed her eyes for a moment, thinking this was how her life would end, in the darkness of a wreck. Alone, her thoughts drifted to her homeworld. To the golden skies she had not seen in years, to the laughter of people she would never hear again. She wondered if anyone would remember her, or if her body would simply drift through the void until nothing was left. A loud clang shattered her fading thoughts. Her eyes opened slightly, and through the broken doorway, a shadow moved. At first, she thought it was another enemy soldier coming to finish what they started, but the figure was different. Taller, heavier, moving with purpose. The shadow stepped into the light, revealing a human in a battered spacesuit. His helmet cracked, but holding. He walked through the wreck like a man who had seen this chaos before. His boots hit the floor hard, scattering debris. Sparks lit his face for brief seconds, showing a jaw set in grim determination. He saw her lying on the floor, and without hesitation, he rushed forward. Her mind struggled to understand. Humans were rare out here, far from their homeworld. Most who came this, deep into hostile space, never returned. Yet here he was, kneeling beside her, checking her breathing. He spoke, but the words were muffled through the helmet. Still his tone was steady, not panicked. With strong, steady hands he lifted her, her weight nothing in his arms. She tried to speak, to ask who he was, but her voice broke into a weak gasp. He adjusted his grip and started moving, stepping over broken panels and through a corridor filled with smoke. Behind them, ship's hull tore open further, the sound deep and terrible. Through the gaps in the metal she saw the endless black of space and the distant glow of enemy ships. They were coming back to make sure nothing survived. The human moved faster, his steps sure even as the floor shook beneath them. At one point, a beam of fire cut across the corridor, and he ducked low, shielding her with his own body. Heat washed over his back, but he didn't slow down. She could feel the steady thump of his heartbeat through his armor, strong and unshaken. Reached a sealed door, its surface glowing red from heat on the other side. He placed her gently against the wall, pulled out a small tool from his belt, and began working on the lock. His movements were quick, practiced. She realized he was not just some pilot who stumbled here by mistake. He knew exactly what he was doing. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing an airlock. On the other side, she could see the shape of his small ship, barely large enough for two, its hull scarred from past battles. The airlock countdown had already begun. Once it closed, it would not open again. Without a second thought, he scooped her up once more and ran. The floor shook violently as something heavy struck the ship's outer side. The alarm screamed louder, warning of imminent collapse. She wanted to tell him to leave her, to save himself, but her voice failed again. They crossed the airlock just as the heavy doors began to seal, pushed her inside the safety of the cabin, slammed his hand on the control panel, and the outer hatch closed behind them. For a brief moment, the chaos outside was gone, replaced by the hum of his ship's systems. She lay against the seat, trying to breathe in the fresh oxygen. Her chest still ached, but her vision cleared enough to see him remove his helmet. His face was marked by scars, his eyes sharp and focused. He glanced at her as if making sure she was still alive, then turned to the controls. The ship shuddered as he powered the engines. Outside, the enemy was already closing in. Through the small window, she could see their dark shapes moving like predators in the void. She thought she had escaped death, only to be pulled toward it again. Yet there was something in the way he held the controls and the calm set of his jaw. It was as if he had been here before, hunted, cornered, outnumbered, and had survived every time. Her last thought before exhaustion claimed her was a single truth. This human was not afraid of dying. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only reason she was still alive. The engines roared to life, shaking the small ship like a beast, waking from deep sleep. The alien girl's head rested against the seat, her body still weak from lack of air, but her mind began to clear. Through the forward window, she saw the ruined vessel she had been trapped in, drifting away, its broken hull glowing with scattered fires. The human pilot's hands moved quickly over the controls, adjusting power flow, sealing bulkheads, locking weapon systems online. Without warning, a flash of red light filled the cabin as the enemy opened fire. Plasma bolts streaked past, some hitting the wreck behind them, tearing it apart even more. The human pushed the throttle forward, and the ship lurched ahead. Cutting through the debris field, the girl felt the heat of battle returning. Not from her body, but from the way the air inside the cabin seemed alive with energy. The human leaned into the controls, weaving through broken metal, using the wreck as cover. She realized he wasn't running in panic. Every turn was calculated. Every move had purpose. The enemy ships closed in, their sleek black forms gliding through the void with deadly grace. They had the advantage in speed and numbers. She tried to speak, to warn him that fighting them was suicide, but he was already ahead of her thoughts. His voice was calm as he said, "Hold on." A massive explosion shook the space around them. As one of the enemy's plasma bolts struck a floating fuel pod, the shockwave sent debris spinning toward them, flaming chunks of metal spinning like knives. The human pulled hard on the controls, twisting the ship sideways, letting the flaming wreckage pass by with only meters to spare. Through the side window, she caught a glimpse of the battlefield, wrecks of other ships drifting silently, frozen, bodies floating in the darkness, the cold beauty of space hiding the violence that had happened moments before. And there they were, two against an entire hunting pack. The heat sensors screamed a warning. Enemy fighters were locking on. The human didn't flinch. He slammed the ship into a narrow corridor between two massive asteroid fragments. The gap was so small, she thought the wings would be torn off, but they passed through. The enemy fire smashing into the rock behind them. The girl could feel her heart pounding. Her own people would never fly like this. They valued safety, control, order. This man seemed to treat danger like an old friend. His hands moved with the ease of someone who had been here too many times before, someone who had learned survival. The hard way? Ahead, a wall of fire blocked their path. A section of a larger ship had ruptured, spilling burning gas into the void. She thought he would turn, but instead he went straight toward it. Her breath caught in her throat as the flames grew larger in the window. Just before they hit, he flipped a series of switches, diverting power to the shields. The ship burst through the firestorm, heat rolling over them, alarms screaming. For a moment she thought the hull had given way, but then they were through, leaving the blaze behind. "Still alive?" he said under his breath, more to himself. Then to her, the enemy was still there, pushing after them. He brought the ship into a steep dive toward the shadow of a nearby planet. The girl saw lightning dancing across its atmosphere, violent storms swirling below. She knew the risks, the gravitational pull, the electrical interference, the unpredictable turbulence. Her people would never enter such a storm in a damaged ship, but he was not her people. They pierced the upper layer of clouds, the entire ship rattling as wind currents grabbed hold. Bolts of lightning danced around them, and the metal hull hummed under the power. The enemy followed, but their sleek ship struggled in the thick atmosphere. The human used every gust, every shift in wind, turning the storm into his ally. For a moment, they lost sight of their pursuers. He took the chance, cutting power to the main engines, letting the storm carry them lower into the planet's chaotic skies. The cabin was dark except for the soft glow of the instruments. Her breathing slowed, but she knew this was not over. "They will not stop," she finally managed to say, her voice still weak. "I know," he replied simply. The sensors beeped again, enemy fighters closing fast. This time, there was no running. The storm broke open ahead, revealing a massive floating mining station anchored to the planet's atmosphere. Its huge metal arms reached into the clouds, harvesting gases and minerals. The human aimed for it. Without hesitation, he skimmed close to the station's surface, weaving between its arms. Enemy fire chased them, but many shots were absorbed by the massive structure instead. He used the cover to swing behind one of the station's storage tanks. When the enemy passed by, searching for them, he powered the ship forward at full speed, firing a burst from his rear cannons. The plasma shots tore into one of the enemy's wings, sending it spinning into the clouds below. The girl's eyes widened, and one down but more to go. He didn't celebrate, didn't slow. He pushed the ship out of the storm's heart, back into the thin upper clouds. The remaining enemies followed, but now they were scattered, less coordinated. She realized something then: this was not luck. Every move he made was pulling them away from their formation, breaking their advantage. He wasn't just running to survive. He was hunting them in his own way. The fight wasn't over yet, but she knew something had changed. For the first time since she had been pulled from that burning wreck, she believed they might actually make it out alive. The storm was behind them now, but the danger had only grown sharper. The small ship burst out of the planet's clouds into the open void once more, trailing thin ribbons of heat and smoke. The human pilot's hands never stopped moving, adjusting. Thrusters, shifting shield power, scanning for the enemy's next move. The alien girl sat strapped in beside him, her breathing steady now but her eyes wide as she watched the black horizon ahead. 3 enemy ships remained, their dark forms. Emerging from the planet's shadow like hunters scenting blood, they spread out in a wide arc, their sleek wings catching the distant light of a nearby star. It was a trap. They were closing every path of escape. The human's gaze narrowed. His voice was calm when he spoke, but it carried a weight that made her shiver. "They think we're running," he said, "so let's make them believe it." Without warning, he jerked the ship into a sharp roll, the stars spinning in the windows. He dove toward a field of shattered asteroids floating silently in space. The rocks were massive, some the size of buildings, others jagged shards that spun slowly in the black. The girl realized what he was doing. He was heading straight into a death maze. The first enemy ship followed, firing bursts of plasma that lit up the dark with flashes of blue light. The humans swerved, using the asteroids as shields. Weaving through gaps so tight she could feel the ship's hull scrape the edges. He didn't slow, didn't hesitate. Every movement seemed to bring them closer to the heart of the field. A sudden flash caught her eye, a missile streaking toward them. Her heart lurched, but the human didn't flinch. He spun the ship around a spinning chunk of rock, letting the missile slam into it instead. The explosion ripped the asteroid apart, sending smaller fragments flying. One of those fragments smashed into the pursuing enemy's wing, spinning it out of control. The girl gripped the edge of her seat. "You destroyed it," she said, her voice filled with shock. He shook his head. "Not yet." Through the rear view, they saw the damaged enemy ship struggling to regain balance. The pilot inside must have been skilled, because the craft steadied. But before it could rejoin the hunt, it collided with another rock and vanished in a burst of fire. 2 left. The other enemy ships closed in, firing in bursts that forced the human deeper into the asteroid field. He ducked behind a wide rock, shutting off the engines for a moment. The sudden silence made her hold her breath. Outside, the debris drifted slowly. The glow of distant stars broken by the shadows of the asteroids. "They'll think we crashed," he whispered. She looked at him, realizing how strange this was. Here she was, in the middle of a fight that should have terrified her, and yet she felt safer than she had in years. The radar lit up. One of the enemies was circling close. The human powered the engines with a sudden burst, swinging the ship out from behind the rock. He opened fire with his forward cannons, the blasts hitting the enemy's shields head-on. The alien ship spun away, but not fast enough. A final burst from the human's guns tore through its cockpit. The explosion sent shards of metal scattering into the void. "One left," he said quietly. The last enemy was smarter. It stayed back, firing from a distance, trying to keep out of range. The human frowned, adjusting the sensors. "He's waiting for us to make a mistake," he said. Instead of charging, the human turned toward a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. The gap was almost invisible in the shadows, a slit of darkness that even the girl could barely see. She thought it was impossible to pass through, but he pushed forward. The ship scraped against the stone as they slid through, sparks flying along the hull. On the other side, they emerged into a hidden pocket of space, a cluster of smaller rocks floating in perfect silence. The humans slowed the engines, eyes locked on the radar. The enemy was approaching, thinking it had them trapped, as soon as the dark shape entered the gap. The human fired a single shot at a loose rock above it. The blast sent the rock tumbling down, smashing into the enemy's wing. The alien craft spun out of control, crashing into another asteroid. The explosion lit the pocket like a brief sunrise. It was over. The girl sat in silence, staring at the fading light of the last blast. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her mind trying to understand what she had just seen. She turned to him. "She took down all of them," she said softly. He didn't answer right away. His hands moved over the controls, adjusting the ships. A course toward open space. Only then did he glance at her, his expression unreadable. "Survival's not about strength," he said. "It's about making them think you're weaker than you are until it's too late." She studied his face in the dim cabin light, the lines of his scars, the steady focus in his eyes. Had met warriors before, fighters who lived for battle, but none of them carried this calm, this quiet certainty that no matter how bad things got, he would find a way through. The asteroids faded behind them as they sailed into the quiet stretch of space. But she knew the silence would not last. Whoever had sent those ships would not stop after one failed hunt. For now, though, she let herself rest, listening to the steady hum of the engines, knowing that as long as this fearless human was at the controls, she had a chance to see another sunrise. The endless black stretched around them, calm for the first time since their escape began. The engines hummed in a steady rhythm, carrying the small ship away from the asteroid field. The alien girl sat quietly in her seat, her hands resting in her lap, eyes fixed on the man at the controls. He had not spoken much since the last battle. His focus was still sharp, scanning the sensors, checking power levels, watching the shadows beyond the glass. She had so many questions. Why had he been there? Why risk his life for her? Why fight? With such reckless skill, yet such calculated precision. But when she looked at him, she saw that his eyes were somewhere far away, lost in thoughts she could not read. After a long silence, she asked softly, "You've done this before, haven't you?" He glanced at her briefly, then returned his attention to the panel. "Done what?" "Save someone when there was no chance to survive," she said. He didn't answer right away. His hands moved across the controls, steady and deliberate, as if he needed a task to avoid the question. Finally, he leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. "A long time ago," he said, "someone did the same for me." Her eyes narrowed. "Who?" His gaze shifted toward the stars, and for a moment his voice lost its steel. "A soldier, not from my world. We were stranded together after a battle, enemy fleets closing in from all sides. I was injured, barely able to move. She carried me across a battlefield under fire, all the way to her ship. She didn't make it out." The girl swallowed hard. She could see the truth in his expression. This wasn't a story meant to impress her. It was a wound he carried in silence. "That's why you came for me," she said quietly. He gave a single nod. "I couldn't leave you there. I've already seen what happens when no one comes." The cabin fell silent again. She leaned back, thinking about his words. In her culture, debts were repaid with equal value. Saving a life meant binding yourself to it forever. She wondered if humans thought the same way, or if he carried his own code of honor that no one could change. Her eyes drifted over him. For the first time she noticed the marks on his skin. Thin, jagged lines along his jaw, a deeper scar across his cheek, another disappearing into his hairline. His hands gripping the controls were rough, with faint burns and small cuts. These were not the marks of a man who fought in one war and returned home. These were the signs of someone who had lived through a lifetime of them. "How many battles have you fought?" she asked. He smirked faintly, not out of pride, but as if the number itself was meaningless, enough to stop counting. The girl's mind raced with unspoken thoughts. She had seen warriors on her homeworld who wore their scars as trophies, speaking endlessly about their victories. This man carried his in silence, as if they were not medals, but reminders. Before she could ask more, the ship's console beeped sharply. The human leaned forward, scanning the display. Faint signal pulsed on the radar, small, distant, but moving fast. His eyes narrowed. "Is it them?" she asked, sitting up. "Could be," he said, "or could be worse." Her chest tightened. Worse. He flicked a few switches, zooming the scanner on the signal. Scavenger ships. Big ones. They strip wrecks and leave nothing alive. They don't care who you are. She felt the temperature in the cabin drop, not from the environment, but from the weight in his tone. Scavengers were feared even among hardened soldiers. They didn't hunt for war, but for profit, and anyone in their path was either taken or destroyed. "Can we outrun them?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "Not with the damage we've taken. They'll see the engine heat if we push it." Her voice lowered. "Then what do we do?"
Hey.
He turned to her, and for the first time, she saw the faint spark of a grin. "We make them lose interest." She frowned. "How?" He reached for the side storage compartment and pulled out a heavy panel, revealing the inner wiring of the ship. "By looking less valuable than we are," he said. "They think we're just another dead wreck. They'll pass us by." For the next few minutes, he shut down non-essential systems, darkening the cabin until only the faint glow of the emergency lights remained. The hum of the engines faded into silence. From the outside, they would look like another drifting casualty of war. They waited. The girl sat in the stillness, her heart pounding as the scavenger ships appeared on the edge of sight. Massive, ugly vessels with jagged holes in rusted metal, moving slowly like predators that knew their prey had nowhere to run. One of them drifted closer, its lights sweeping across the small ship. The beam passed over the cockpit, pausing for what felt like hours. She held her breath, every muscle tense. Beside her, the human didn't move, his face calm, eyes locked on the scavenger's movement. It was as if he had done this exact thing before and knew exactly how long to wait. Finally, the beam moved away. The scavenger ship drifted past, its engines rumbling in the distance. The girl's shoulders dropped in relief, but she noticed the human hadn't relaxed. "What is it?" she whispered. "They'll be back," he said, voice low. "Scavengers always circle twice." The silence inside the small ship felt heavy, like a deep ocean pressing against the walls. The alien girl kept her eyes on the distant shapes of the scavenger vessels, their bulky forms slowly drifting through the void. They looked slow, almost lazy, but she could feel the danger in their movements. Predators never needed to rush when they knew the prey was trapped. The human sat motionless at the controls, every muscle still, his eyes locked on the glowing shapes on the radar. The screen showed the scavengers splitting into two groups, one moving away, the other circling back exactly as he had predicted. "They're coming," he said quietly. Her pulse quickened. "You said if we stayed still, they would lose interest." "They will," he replied, "unless they think we're hiding something worth taking." The second scavenger ship approached, its hull a mess of welded plates and stolen parts. Massive claws hung from its underside, ready to tear open whatever it found. Its searchlight flickered across the debris field before sweeping toward them. The beam hit the small ship, bathing the cockpit in harsh white light. The girl held her breath, forcing herself not to move. The human didn't even blink, his hand hovering over a control switch hidden from view. The scavenger's light lingered, scanning every inch of their hull. Then it moved on. Her shoulders eased, but before relief could settle, the radar lit up with another signal, sharper, faster. This was no scavenger. The human's jaw tightened. "They're here," he said. "Who?" she asked. "Your hunters," he replied. "The ones who destroyed your ship." The girl's stomach turned cold. "They found us this quickly." They were always close, he said, powering the systems. Back on? The scavengers must have sent them our location in exchange for a cut of the wreckage. The ship came alive again, panels lighting up, engines rumbling. Outside, the scavenger vessel veered away, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire of a real battle. The hunters didn't waste time. The sleek black fighters streaked into view, their weapons already hot. The first barrage hit hard, shaking the ship and sending warning lights flashing across the console. The human threw the throttle forward, spinning them away from the blasts. Plasma fire lit up the dark, streaks of deadly light chasing them through the void. The girl gripped her seat, the harness digging into her shoulders. "We can't fight them," she said, panic slipping into her voice. He didn't look at her. "We don't have to fight them. We just have to make them miss." He dove toward the wreckage of an old warship drifting nearby. Its massive frame floated silently, a tomb from a forgotten battle. Twisted metal, broken cannons, and torn armor made it look like a giant skeleton in space. He guided the ship into its shadow, weaving between jagged pieces of hull. The enemy followed, their shots tearing chunks from the old wreck as they tried to hit him. He used every broken corridor, every gaping hole, to block their line of fire. The girl's breath caught as they passed through a narrow gap, so tight the edges of the ship scraped against it. One of the enemy fighters miscalculated, clipping its wing against the wreck. It spun out of control, smashing into a drifting piece of armor before exploding into a burst of fire. "One down," he said under his breath. The second fighter was smarter. It pulled back, keeping its distance, firing carefully. The human's eyes scanned the wreck, looking for an opening. Then he saw it, a collapsed hangar with a small access tunnel leading straight out the other side. He turned sharply, diving into the tunnel. The fighter followed, speeding through the cramped space, its weapons firing in short bursts. Sparks rained across the cockpit as stray blasts grazed the hull. They burst out into open space again, but the human had angled the exit perfectly. The fighter came out directly into the path of a massive spinning chunk of metal. It struck the enemy square in the nose, crushing the front of the craft. The explosion lit the sky with a violent flash. The girl stared in shock. "You destroyed them both," she said. He kept his eyes on the sensors. "Not all of them." Chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "They never send just two," he replied. "More will be on the way. And this time they'll be ready for everything I just did." The girl looked down, fear twisting in her chest. "Then what can we do?" He glanced at her, and for the first time since they met, there was no faint smile, no hint of amusement in his eyes, only the steel of a man who had made up his mind. "We stop running," he said. "We make our stand." Her eyes widened. "Here, in the open." "No," he said, turning the ship toward a distant cluster of lights. "There's a place not far from here. If they want to fight, we'll give them one on our terms." The engines flared, and the small ship shot forward, vanishing into the darkness between the stars. The girl gripped the armrests, not sure if she was more afraid of the enemies chasing them, or of what this fearless human had planned for when they arrived. The cluster of lights grew larger in the distance, breaking the darkness of space. At first, the alien girl thought it was another city station, but as they drew closer, she saw the truth. It was a scrap fortress, a massive ring of welded wrecks and abandoned ships, floating together like a shield. Inside that ring was a hidden docking hub. It was powered by stolen generators and guarded by automated turrets. The human guided the ship toward a narrow entry gap. The turrets shifted slightly as they scanned him, but they did not fire, she realized. This was not a place open to strangers. This was somewhere he had been before. The moment they slipped inside, the engines eased, and the fortress swallowed them in shadow. Ships of all shapes and sizes drifted within the ring, some patched together from multiple holes, others scarred from battles. It was a graveyard and a safe haven at the same time. The humans set the ship down on a small landing platform near Wa. The Edgy powered everything down and stood. "We have minutes before they find us," he said, grabbing a compact rifle from a wall rack. "If they come in here, they'll have to fight for every step." The girl unbuckled herself, frowning. You can't fight them alone. Let me help. He looked at her, and for a moment she thought he would refuse, but then he tossed her a smaller weapon from a storage case. Stay close to cover. Only shoot when you have to. The air inside the fortress was stale and cold, smelling faintly of metal and oil. The narrow walkways between stacked wrecks felt like a maze. The human moved with purpose, choosing high ground overlooking the main entry gap. She followed, keeping her steps quiet. The minutes stretched until the distant hum of engines reached them. The enemy had arrived. Through a narrow opening, she saw the black shapes of their ships approaching. They slowed as they neared the fortress, scanning for threats. The automated turrets along the outer ring rotated into position, their targeting, systems locking on. The first barrage was sudden and brutal. Turrets spat streaks of energy into the darkness, forcing the enemy ships to scatter. One exploded instantly, its remains drifting in flaming pieces. But the others adapted quickly, weaving between the incoming fire. The human crouched low, aiming. His rifle through a gap in the wreckage. "They'll land fighters inside the ring," he said. "Be ready for them to come in fast." He was right. Moments later, the fortress shook as enemy landing pods slammed onto the platforms. Their doors burst open, and armored soldiers poured out, weapons flashing in the dim light. The girl's hands trembled as she fired her first shot, striking one soldier in the chest. The impact knocked him back over the edge into open space. The human's fire was sharper, every shot precise, every movement efficient. He shifted positions constantly, never letting the enemy pin him down. The battle inside the fortress was chaos. The sound of gunfire echoing through metal corridors, the glow of blasts lighting up the shadows, the sharp hiss of damaged vents spilling steam. The girl ducked behind a fallen engine casing as a plasma bolt scorched the wall above her head. A soldier rushed her position. But before she could aim, the human was there, tackling him to the ground. He finished the fight in seconds, then hauled her to her feet. "Keep moving," he said. They pushed toward the heart of the fortress, using the maze of wrecks to break the enemy's formation. The automated turrets on the inside platforms joined the fight, shredding enemy squads that strayed into open areas. Still, more kept coming. The girl's lungs burned from the effort, her hands aching from the weapon's recoil, but she refused to stop. Every time she hesitated, she remembered the cold darkness of her destroyed ship. The moment she had almost given up, and the man who had carried her out, they reached a control tower at the center of the fortress. From here, the human could see the battle unfolding across the entire ring. He studied the fight, then tapped a flashing red control on the panel. "What are you doing?" she asked. He kept his eyes on the screen, closing the trap. Massive blast doors along the outer ring began to slide shut, sealing the enemy inside. With them, the turrets shifted, focusing all fire inward. The narrow spaces of the fortress turned from a battlefield into a killing ground. The enemy realized too late what had happened. Their ships, trapped inside the ring, became easy targets. One by one, they fell under the combined fire of the turrets and the fortress defenders. The human turned to her. "This is our stand. We hold until none of them are left." The final minutes were fierce. Enemy soldiers fought with desperation, but the human moved through them like a force of nature, his rifle never still. She stayed close, covering his back, her shots growing more confident with each one. At last the gunfire faded. Remaining enemies broke, fleeing toward the few exits that had not been sealed. The human did not chase them, he only watched, until the last black shape disappeared into the dark beyond the ring. Silence returned, broken only by the hum of the fortress systems. The girl leaned against the wall, catching her breath. She looked at him, his armor scorched, his rifle low. At his side, "We won," she said, almost in disbelief. He shook his head slightly. "We survived. That's all that matters." But she could see it in his eyes. This fight had been more than survival. It had been a message to whoever had sent those hunters. They were still alive, and they were not running anymore. The fortress floated in silence, its outer ring still glowing faintly from the heat of battle. Fragments of broken ships drifted slowly away, carried by invisible currents of space. The alien girl stood near the edge of a high platform, staring out at the wreckage. She could hardly believe they were still alive. Every breath she took felt like something she had stolen back from death. The human moved among the remaining defenders, checking weapons, speaking in short, quiet words to those who had fought alongside him. His armor was blackened in several places, and a shallow cut ran along his cheek, but his movements showed no sign of weakness. He carried himself as if the fight was not over, as if another wave of enemies could arrive at any moment. When he finally returned to her side, she studied his face in the dim light. There was no pride there, no celebration, only the steady calm of someone who measured victory in survival, not in glory. "They'll send more," she said softly. "They will," he agreed, adjusting the rifle on his shoulder. "But not today." Long pause settled between them as they both looked out into the endless dark. The girl's thoughts drifted back to the moment she had been lying on the cold floor of her ruined ship, oxygen running out, the shadow of death already closing in. She remembered thinking that no one would come for her, that her story would end quietly, forgotten. And yet here she stood, because one man had refused to turn away. "Why risk yourself again and again?" she asked. "Why not leave me when it would have been easier?" He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Because I've been left before. I know what it feels like to realize no one is coming." Her chest tightened at his words. There was a weight behind them, a history she could only guess at. She wanted to ask more, but his gaze shifted toward the stars. His attention already moving ahead, the defenders began clearing the battlefield, pulling damaged ships deeper into the fortress for repairs, stripping weapons from those too broken. To fly, the human guided her back to his own craft, now scarred, but still operational. He began the startup sequence, a hum of the engines filling the small cabin as the ship lifted off the platform. The fortress defenders saluted with brief nods, a silent acknowledgement between survivors. She noticed the respect in their eyes when they looked at him, not the kind given to a commander, but to someone they knew would never abandon them in a fight. Once they cleared the outer ring, the stars opened up around them again, bright and cold. For the first time since her rescue, there was no immediate threat on the radar. No flashing red markers, no fast-approaching enemies. Only the quiet expanse of the galaxy stretched out before them. She leaned back in her seat, letting herself breathe fully. "So where do we go now?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the navigation display, then he set a course toward a distant system, somewhere they won't expect, somewhere you can recover. "You?" she asked. "I keep moving," he said simply. "That's how you stay alive out here." Her gaze lingered on him. She knew he meant it, but she also knew something else. For all his talk about survival, he had stayed when it would have been easier to leave. He had fought not just to live, but to make sure she lived too. That was not the thinking of a man who only cared about himself. The stars slid past as the ship picked up speed. Outside the window, the remains of the battle fortress shrank until it was just another faint shape in the dark. She thought about the hunters, about the scavengers, about all the dangers still waiting in the void. But she also thought about how many times she had seen death coming and how many times he had turned it away. For a while, neither of them spoke. The hum of the engines became a steady rhythm, and the cold beauty of space wrapped around them. Finally, she said, "You gave me more than my life back." He glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "You gave me a reason to fight again," she said. "I had nothing left before you came. Now I do." A small, almost invisible smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Then make it count." Her eyes stayed on the stars ahead. Somewhere out there were worlds she had never seen, places untouched by the war that had taken so much from her. She felt something she had not felt in years, the sharp, fragile spark of hope. The ship's course shifted slightly as he adjusted for a faster route. The girl watched his hands move over the controls with the same precision she had seen in battle. She realized she had stopped fearing what might come next. Whatever dangers waited in the void, they would face them together. As the engines roared a little louder and the stars streaked into lines, she whispered under her breath, "Fearless human." He didn't react, but she saw his shoulders relax. Just slightly, and somewhere deep in the silence of space, far beyond the light of any sun, two survivors flew on, not just alive, but carrying the quiet, unshakable truth that neither of them would ever face the darkness alone again.